Darwin and Alfred Wallace figured out evolution independently. And sometimes there's just a spark, a hunch. A hunch that means nothing until it is put to a test. Will the test results support the hunch? There comes a moment when the thinkers hold their breath. Harry and I experienced all of that. I sent the article so far to Harry. He read it, and we had a video call. We began by voicing our shared appreciation of elegance, and we set out to define the words straighter and dangler elegantly. For a hand to contain a dangler, I said, the other three cards need to be close together. But how close? One gap would qualify for sure, Harry said, like 7-6-4. Next to those three cards, a queen would be a dangler. What about two gaps, I asked, like 7-5-3? Those seem close enough together to activate the existence of danglerism. Harry nodded in agreement, and I went on. We could say a dangler means three of your cards span no more than 5 cards, and the fourth card is removed from the cluster by 4 or more gaps. That last condition cannot be right, Harry said. If we have Jack 10-9-5, the 5 is fewer than 4 gaps away from the 9, yet it adds nothing to the straight-making potential of the hand, because if the board is 8-7-6, then our 10-9 makes a 10-high straight, and the 5 does nothing. But with Jack 10-9-6, I said, we do need the 6 to make a straight when the board is 8-7-5. So with Jack 10-9-5, the 5 is a dangler, even though it's fewer than 4 gaps from the cluster. Right, Harry said, and with Jack 10-9-6, the 6 is not a dangler. I frowned. What's wrong? Harry asked. I was really hoping for something tidy, like E=mc², to fall out of the sky, I said. This is getting messy, and it's lunchtime. Let's talk tomorrow. Spans. Refreshed and back at my computer, I resurrected the driving question of the universal starting hand chart and aimed it at PLO. In a deep stack live cash game, what are the worst hands I think I should ever play? I decided to start with the 9 high hands so that my list would be all integers and no letters, and I started typing. 9876, 9875, 9865, 9765. Those are straighters for sure. In other words, they are not autofolds. Right. Next came these hands. 9864, 9764, 9754. Those are straighters too, meaning that with favorable conditions, such as completing the small blind in a multi-way limped pot, or when I'm on the button and a player who plays poorly is in the pot, I would play 9864, but not 9863. Correct. But that's just me and my gut talking. Granted, it's a gut that has eaten a lot of Omaha, but still, it's just one voice, one opinion. 9863. Why is that hand an auto-muck in my world? Maybe it's because the 4 in 9864 connects to the 8, and the 3 in 9863 doesn't? What's the pattern here? The total span of 9864 is 987654. That's 6 cards. The total span of 9863 is 7 cards. I wonder if that rule holds elsewhere. 9854 I would play sometimes. 9843 I would always fold. 9754 I would play sometimes. 9743 I would always fold. Maybe my rule is nothing more than this. 6 span maximum. With that restriction, what hand has the worst shape? That would be 9654. Not a gem, but also not an autofold. And then it occurred to me. This is how I had played at Aria. Unless I had a pair or an ace, I was folding the 7 spanners, like, every time. This is cool. Time to call Harry. I think I'm onto something, I said. Me too, Harry said. It's all about the gaps. A straighter has no more than 2 gaps in the whole hand. That is the guideline I've been using when I play, without even realizing it. Before I could process what I had just heard, he asked, So what's your idea? It's all about the span, I said. 6 max. We shared a stare. Holy shit! Harry grinned. It's the same thing. We were extremely happy. I hit the vape to celebrate, and then I said, I can't get over the fact that I'm 35 years older than you, and our tightness is exactly tied. Before we don't know that for sure yet, Harry said. What about high cards? I like those. I'm talking about the straighter's definition, Buzzbrain. High cards are a complicating factor. What did your first draft say? Something about giving special considerations to high cards in general and suited aces in particular? Right, I said. We'll need to invent rules for those cases to complete the definition of a straighter. So much for elegance. We have no choice now, I said. We have to see this through. Harry lit up. Actually, we don't. Let's just throw out the aces. What do you mean, throw them out? I mean, remove them from the conversation. I think the word straighter should refer only to hands that do not have an ace. I'm on board with that, I said. Besides being sensible, it's also elegant. We'd only need to add one word to the current definition. A PLO straighter is an unpaired aceless hand with no more than 2 gaps. There we go, said Harry. That's our definition. But why? Why what? We should have an explanation as to why it's best to not even talk about ace-high hands as they pertain to straighters. Because they're personal, Harry said, and they get lots of attention, as they should. The whole game is hands with an ace plus hands with a pair plus straighters. And it's the ace-high hands that generate the grayest areas, specifically because many ace-high non-straighters are playable. As to which ace-high hands to fold, well, that needs its own article. And you should write it, I said. You could call it Waiting for Acers. Harry wrote that down while he said, What about king-high dangler hands? What's the worst hand you play that contains a king and a deuce? I muck 'em all, I said. Even king, queen, jack, deuce, double-suited? Yep. That was a trick question, Harry said. I'd do the same thing. I've gone suit blind at PLO, except for suited aces, of course. This was another convergence of theory and practice arrived at by millions of trials in Harry's case and decades of trials in mine. Straighter shapes. If 9876 equals ABCD, and if we call ABCD the shape of that straighter, then straighters come in 10 shapes, and here they are. 9876 is ABCD. 9875 is ABCE. 9865 has the shape of ABDE. 9765 is ACDE. 9874 is ABCF. 9864 is ABDF. 9854 is ABEF. 9764 is ACDF. 9754 is ACEF. And 9654 has the shape of ADEF. And just for fun, here are the best 9-high hands you would fold when waiting for straighters. The 7 spanners. 9873, 9863, 9853, 9843, 9763, 9753, 9743, 9653, 9643, and 9543. Those hands are equivalent to Ace-9, King-8, Queen-7, Jack-6, 10-5, 9-4, 8-3, and 7-deuce at No Limit Hold'em. Strategic merits of waiting for straighters at Pot Limit Omaha. Wraps and equity. At Hold'em with 9-8, there are 3 ways to flop an open-ender. With 9-7, there are 2 ways, and 9-6 has 1 way. The same is true at PLO. Every pip matters. 9876 has better wrap flopping potential than 9875. and Jack 10 8-6 has better wrap flopping potential than Jack 10 8-5. And when we flop a wrap, we very often get to cash in the full equity of our starting hand by seeing the river. This is big. The value of a hand is not only about how it performs in an equity calculator, it's also about how it plays. It's about the hand's ability to correctly see the river, because only then does a hand realize its full statistical potential. 9-8-7-5 will see the river more often than a hand like Queen Jack 7-5. And that stat alone gives 9-8-7-5 additional worth, above and beyond its straight-making potential. When a straighter flops a wrap, you see full board runouts. This is the hidden value. It's like the dark energy of Omaha. The straighter edge. Waiting for straighters creates a permeating edge, like the house edge at roulette, or like being taller than your opponent at basketball. You have a simple advantage that's just there, all the time, independent of skill or luck or the weather. Which is not to say that you don't have to be skilled at basketball to win at basketball. You do. Height is not enough. But it sure helps, as does having better cards, on average, than your poker opponents. Free rolls, fold equity, and the secret sauce. Free rolls are the best, and drawing dead is the worst. The secret sauce of the professional survivor is to glom on to free rolls and to take precautions against drawing dead and nearly dead. Waiting for straighters is the secret ingredient in the secret sauce. It not only tips the stats in your favor, it also cultivates a strong range in your opponent's minds, and you gain fold equity. Fold equity is when you bet and they fold. Fold equity is where half the grinder's profit comes from. The other half comes from having better cards, and the other half comes from consistency. Waiting for straighters does all of the above. No lapsing, no pendulum, no problem. Why to do it? As with Hold'em, waiting for straighters at Potlam in Omaha is not about following a one-size-fits-all starting hand chart. It's not about theoretical correctness. It's about drawing new lines that you decide on and then intending to stay within those lines for a few sessions at least because, 1, you want to see if you can, and 2, it might improve your score. It's easier. Good starting hands, compared to lesser hands, make the turn and river easier to play. The decisions are more perceivable, less ambiguous, and more fun. Chances are high that waiting for straighters would lower your VPIP, and if that's the case, here are 5 of the potential benefits. Improve the long-term stability of your game. More on that later. Improve the short-term stability of your game. More on that later too. As mentioned, it'll increase your squeezer vig, also known as fold equity. Number 4, fewer marginal situations means fewer tricky spots, means less guessing, means more confidence, and more on that later. And last, less exertion per hand means more stamina, which means playing more tables online and playing longer live sessions with less depletion. It's safe. Waiting for straighters at PLO is a safe approach for beginners, similar to playing super tight before the flop when learning no-limit hold'em. When I teach a beginner how to play live poker in a public poker room, I recommend that they play nothing but pocket pairs and ace-king at first, from all seats. The reason for doing so is to log lots of hours at the table to gain table experience, while minimizing the amount you lose per hour by playing very few hands, while at the same time you minimize your strategic disadvantages post-flop by playing only those starting hands that result in the simplest post-flop decisions. And then, over time, the pre-flop ranges expand, safely, comfortably. In the same way, waiting for straighters at PLO is a safe way to learn the game. The difference is, at PLO, you don't ever need to expand your ranges to be a consistent winner. But you do have to play consistently superb post-flop poker to be a consistent winner, no matter what your preflop ranges are. Stretching the lines. Waiting for straighters is strictly defined, but it doesn't have to stay that way. You can use it as a guideline, a baseline, even a lifeline that you intend on stretching as appropriate in battle. For example, you might choose to play some of the best non-straighters when you are in one of the three situations where you know at the outset that you will be last to act throughout the hand. That would be when you're on the button, and when you're in the big blind versus small blind, and when you are on the cutoff and the button telegraphs a preflop fold. In those spots, you might decide to play, say, any hand that has 3 to a Broadway, even though they have a dangler. Those hands would be King Queen Jack X, King Queen 10X, King Jack 10X, and Queen Jack 10X. Or you might play Jack 10 9 deuce on the strength of having 3 in a row. That was a long way to say that it's natural and necessary to mix some gray into the black and white picture I've painted. Because until you run your own tests, you'll know nothing about the scope or effect of waiting for straighters on your game. Reciprocality. Reciprocality is about creating profitable differences between you and your opponents on purpose. If you get better sleep than they do, that's a profitable difference. If you tilt less than they do after getting multiple sets cracked and losing big for 5 days in a row, that's a profitable difference. What if one of the things you did differently on purpose was to usually have the best hand on every street? By usually, I mean more than half the time, and by best hand, I mean a hand that is favored in a runout against each opponent. Let's say you play 1 million streets and you go back and do a heads-up runout against every hand you faced from each of the streets you faced them. If you would win more runouts than you lose, that's what I mean by usually having the best hand on every street. There are 3 types of PLO hands. 1. Hands with 1 pair, 2 pair, trips, or quads. 2. Hands with 1 ace and no pairs. And 3. Hands with no aces and no pairs. To play a style of poker that could be called, "My hand's better than your hand," you wait for the best hands in all 3 categories. Besides the obvious statistical advantages of doing so, you are also now powered by dark energy in all 3 categories. Let's look at what happens when you and your opponent both have Group 3 hands. If you always have a straighter and your opponent plays a wider range, then you will usually have the best hand before the flop. When both of your hands connect with the flop, then you will have the best hand on the flop, and on the turn, and on the river more often than they do. And when you share 2 or 3 cards with your opponent, you will sometimes hear the F word. No, not that F word, although you'll hear that too. The F word I'm talking about is free roll. When waiting for straighters, you will sometimes play Jack 10 8-6 and never play Jack 10 8-5. Let's pit those hands against each other in a big pot. You have Jack 10 8-6 and your opponent has Jack 10 8-5. The flop is 9-7-4. You both flop a wrap and you both play aggressively on the flop and you get all in on the flop. The turn is a blank. We'll say it's a no-4. On the river, if any card but a 5 comes, it's a split pot. And when a 5 comes, you enjoy a sip of the secret sauce. It's quite tasty and worth the wait. And those 2 starting hands differed by only 1 pip. Take a hand like Jack 10 9-7 up against a typical, somewhat attractive non-straighter, such as Queen Jack 6-5, and even more good times lie ahead. But sometimes you'll be outgunned. Let's give you Jack 10 8-6, and your opponent has 10 9 8-7. You are poised to lose money on this hand if you hit the flop, because most of the flops that hit your hand will hit your opponent's hand even harder. And the reason you're behind is because your hand has more gaps than his. You have 2 gaps and he has 0. It happens, even while waiting for straighters. You get out-gapped. The idea behind WFS is to get out-gapped less often than you do now, and to out-gap the opposition more often than you do now. There's you, with never more than 2 gaps, and then there's the rest of the world, oftentimes with 3 or more gaps. That, right there, is the straighter edge. And when you do the math, you end up with this equation. Usually best times the rest of your life equals a very big number. Part 3. Using weighting frustrators to tame tilt, plug leaks, and reduce fear of self. I play and teach under the assumption that tilt reduction, leak reduction, and fear reduction are profitable pursuits because they rate to improve one's score. But this section is not only about material gain. It's also about living an easier life, during sessions and in between, by lightening the mental load. You can use weighting frustrators to reduce tilt, which I defined in Elements of Poker as any deviation from your A game and your A mindset. From that perspective, reckless betting is the same as fatigue, is the same as boredom. They're all varieties of tilt. And you can use weighting frustrators to plug leaks. Leaks are the effect of tilt. When you feel impatient, that's tilt. When impatience causes you to see too many flops, that's a leak. When the desire for revenge is burning inside you, that's tilt. When you keep attacking the one player who keeps beating you, that's a leak. And you can use weighting frustrators to make yourself less fearful of your own tilting and leaking. Here's how weighting frustrators has helped to pave my path to painless poker. Plugging leaks. Recall that in 2004, I sat alone on my couch and filled out Earl's chart with my starting hands for Limit Hold'em. Here's the rest of that story. My gut knotted up halfway through the first box. I knew that if I kept going, I would expose myself to myself as a fraud. My hypocrisy would have no place left to hide. I kept going anyway. I peered into each pre-flop situation. There's one razor and I'm in the cutoff. And asked myself, what is the worst hand I should play in this spot? Then I littered the page with my shattered delusions. I was finally forcing myself to face the fact that in the fog of war, I play more hands than I think I should. Not only did I not practice what I taught, I didn't even practice what I thought. I mean, I did, most of the time. But this game isn't about most of the time. It's about having an edge all the time, as big as it can be. That was the code I lived by. It was my identity. By filling out the chart, I was rooting around in my leaks and writing them down. And from that day on, I could no longer pretend that I wasn't a pretender. Unless I stopped leaking. Ha, there's a fantasy for you. Hey, you never know. Maybe the pain of knowing how bad I play will somehow deter me from playing bad. Dream on. I finished filling out the chart. A year later, I filled it out again, this time for no limit. And then again, a while after that. These were more like spasms of compulsion than what I would call work. Whatever it was, the result was awesome. 2 big upgrades came from messing with the chart. By asking myself, what do I do and why, in the 40 most common pre-flop betting patterns, I refined my A-game. And by deciding to fold certain hands in certain situations no matter what, the chart worked like a scalpel and lopped off ugly growths of C-game. Quick side note, you can download the chart along with instructions at my website, in Word and Excel. I call it the Universal Starting Hand Chart because it's blank until you set the scene. Just go to TommyAngelo.com/USHC. Less tilt and less fear. The line between 3-gappers and 4-gappers was a line I could see, and it did not waver, no matter how frustrated I was, or angry, or anxious, or downtrodden. Weighting frustrators became a do-not-cross line. If I stayed on the safe side, survival was guaranteed. If I crossed the line, well, it would by no means mean certain death. I might even make more money. I would also expose myself to the pain and complexity that only exists on the danger side of the straighter line, where I lived for many years. It was a grand time. I was able to satisfy my cravings for sporadically irrational aggression and still make a good living. Then I became older, and now I value simplicity and peace of mind. The reason waiting for straighters reduced my tilt was because I was trimming off the very worst of my preflop situations, the plays that generated the most variance and the least profit. Waiting for straighters removed the moments of highest consternation and aggravation from my game. By saying no to marginal situations, I had less fluctuation, which resulted in less tilt and better focus. And that caused my earn rate to go up, which incented me to hold the line. As an aside, lowering one's variance also lowers one's bankroll needs, which is not in itself a reason to favor less variance, but it sure can come in handy at times. By waiting for straighters, I was also pruning the times I got too frisky with lousy hands. I did this by rigidly defining the term lousy hands. The idea was to always fold these hands, even if I was playing my loose aggressive style, and even if I was suited, and even if I was on the button and everybody limped, and even if I was in the small blind and everybody limped. Ready? King 8, King 7, King 6, King 5, King 4, King 3, King Deuce, Queen 7, Queen 6, Queen 5, Queen 4, Queen 3, Queen Deuce, Jack 6, Jack 5, Jack 4, Jack 3, Jack Deuce, 10 5, 10 4, 10 3, 10 Deuce, 9 4, 9 3, 9 Deuce, 8 3, 8 Deuce, and 7 Deuce. I swore an oath to John Lennon to dump my dumper hands no matter what. Of course I broke the oath tons of times, but that was okay because I retook it, and retook it. And after some number of years, I got there. That was about 7 years ago. That's how long it's been since I've paid to see a flop with one of my dumpers. At the same time, I swore a different oath of tightness, this one to John Bonham, regarding my minuscule opening range from the early seats. I've held to that oath for a long time too, and now I'm never in shitty pots with shitty cards and shitty position unless it's a free play from the big blind. And I do mean never. Whew! What a relief! Gone are my fears of tilting and leaking. And now poker feels, and I don't think I've seen this word used in this context, easy. The difference that makes the difference. To play or not to play, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of middling starters out of position, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by mucking, end them. I actually know the answer to that one. 'Tis nobler to muck. To play or not to play, that really is the most important question. It doesn't matter if the game is draw poker, stud poker, or a game of flops. The first round of betting is in a class of its own. Is it profitable to invest in this hand, in this situation, against these players at this time? Lines must be drawn, consciously or otherwise, between invest now and wait for a better spot. Playing No Limit Hold'em, I'm on the button with Jack 7 suited. 3 players limp. This is a no-brainer. I either call or raise. If I have Jack 6 suited, it's also a no-brainer. I fold. I have concluded that for me, in this situation, the straighter line is the difference between plus EV and minus EV. Playing 5-10 pot limit Omaha, I'm in the small blind. Under the gun limps, and it's folded to me. I look left, and I can see that the big blind is not going to raise. With 9-8-7-5 offsuit, I toss a $5 chip in. With 9-8-7 deuce, I toss my cards in. Playing 5-10 No Limit Hold'em, I'm on the button. It's folded to the cutoff, who opens for 3x. With Ace-10 offsuit, I might fold, I might call, or I might raise, depending on the usual slew of variables. With Ace-9 offsuit, I used to maybe play it in this spot, but now I always fold, because 1. I wait for straighters. 2. I don't want to be haunted by Bobby Hoff. Have I drawn my lines in the right place? I have decided to believe that I probably have. The cool thing is, I'll never know if I'm right to wait for straighters. Such is the nature of live cash game poker. The EVs of our decisions are always unknown and unknowable. I like that. Actually, I rely on it to keep me from going crazy with self-doubt and inner debate. Waiting for straighters isn't about making straights. It's about winning more big pots than you lose. It's about acting last more often than they do. It's about maintaining power over the people and control over yourself. Waiting for straighters is not a strategy, it's an experiment. Will it yield positive results? There's only one way to find out. The end.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.